goody. Another juicy fly for my web. It's been so long since I've had a decent snack.
Bit of a nuisance, but what a fine addition she'll make. Oh, don't be frightened by those rejects. They were just scrap fodder for the pile. There are far greater threats here than you realize. You will make a fine addition. Join me. Join me.
Hello Internet, welcome to Game Theory, the show that's constantly reaching and stretching for answers. So, kind of like the nerdier version of Mommy Longlegs. And welcome back to our coverage of Poppy Playtime. Probably should rename the game Poppyless Playtime, since 2 chapters in and we've spent like 5 minutes with the character. And of those 5 minutes, like none of it's actually been playing, so just a clickbait title across the board. Last episode we broke down 2 of the biggest mysteries people were asking about this latest installment. The first was figuring out the real identity of our little doll here. In my very first theory for the game, we concluded that Poppy was created using the soul and body parts of Stella Graber, an employee of Playtime Co. However, this chapter revealed that Stella was still very much alive when Mommy Longlegs was introduced back in the 1990s. Considering that Poppy was invented in the 1950s, timeline didn't really work out. So, who then is Poppy? Well, it turns out she's the adopted daughter of Playtime Co.'s founder, Elliot Ludwig, a girl who died tragically sometime in the 1960s. According to evidence in the game, he managed to revive her inside the Poppy doll, but was unsure of how he did it. This led to thousands of experiments where he tried to harness the power of poppy flowers to bring toys to life. Experiment 1006 would be the one to prove successful, giving rise to a new type of living toy, the prototype. This monster made up the other half of that previous theory, as we looked into the big pointy-clawed beast. It's an experiment that we're told is smarter and more dangerous than any other experiment in the factory, considering we've been up against this, and this, and this. Him being that much smarter doesn't really bode too well for us. But talking about these 2 is only really scratching the surface of what's really happening at Playtime Co. What are these living toys made from? Who are we in all of this? Will this game ever not be similar to FNAF? And why is a caterpillar dog with elf feet so disturbing to the very core of my being? Well, I think I have answers to all these questions and more. Alright, maybe not the last 2, but definitely the first couple. And by the end of today's episode, we'll be that much closer to figuring out all the twists and turns that Poppy has planned. Spoiler alert, I think that we might be the true villain of this whole narrative. Let's start at the makeup of the monsters. Originally, we suspected that the flesh and blood of former employees was being used to help create the sentient toys that are now chasing us around the factory. I mean, look at all the blood in this place. And usually it's found alongside a broken toy. Plus, as Huggy Wuggy falls into the abyss at the end of chapter 1, he leaves blood splatter on all the pipes that he hits on his way down. Combine that with our theory that Stella was inside a Poppy, and boom, you got yourself a recipe for the most gruesome company health plan ever. However, chapter 2 seems to be pulling us in a different direction. Once you defeat Mommy Longlegs and get back to the game station to free Poppy, you can find 2 notes on either side of the control panel. One is about a scientist complaining about the lack of natural light in the lab, which, let me tell ya, as someone who literally locks himself in a closet to work on episodes, totally get that. Hashtag relatable. But it's the second note that I want us to pay attention to. It starts off harmless enough. Just a list of instructions for employees working on the game station floor. Quote, start by reporting to the control station. Always keep a minimum distance of 20 yards away from Mommy Longlegs. The train will arrive with the children at 8 a.m. All children will be gathered inside the game station all at once. The order of the games will be musical memory, whack-a-wuggy, then statues. A series of bridges and doors from a control station should guide you to each game. End quote. I mean, you know, it's all pretty straightforward stuff, but it's the last section where my theorist senses really start to prick up. Quote again, only one child should ever play a game at a time. Children who are not playing a game will wait in the game station. There's playground equipment to keep them entertained. Record each child's performance as it's relevant to each game. Music memory, composure, memory, pattern recognition. Whack-a-wuggy, hand-eye coordination, and reaction times. Statues, agility, strength, and speed. Once the children have left for the day, return to the control station. Give all reports to Ms. Stella Graber to sort through. End quote. The children weren't just playing any old games. These games were specifically designed to test children and monitor their skills. And that's not all. When you break out of of the statues game, you can actually find 2 of these reports hidden inside the room for a child named Michaela Hyssop. Each proctor goes through and explains how Michaela performed in each task. Quote, she has a good grasp on the concept and decent performance, but Michaela made mistakes on several of the color patterns. In her second attempt, she was making noticeable improvements. Quote again, Michaela is very accurate and fast. Few mistakes were made. You can actually see this improvement reflected in her scores, going from 331 to 434. However, notice what's written right at the top of the page. Underneath the child's name, the name of the proctor, is another category, assigned toy. For Michaela, this was Candy Cat. Now, why would you need to assign a specific toy to each individual child? Unless, of course, you needed that child to have some kind of deep connection with the toy for some kind of supernatural purpose, like, say, turning the child into that toy. Certainly sounds like something that happened in an indie horror game. And look at this. Right at the start of the chapter, we find this note in Elliot Ledwig's office that talks about his experiments with dead rats and using the poppy flower to try and revive them. According to the document, it doesn't work. We talked about all that last episode. However, something we didn't mention last episode was that at the end of the note, Elliot leaves us with this parting thought. Quote, perhaps something larger than a rat would yield different results. And suddenly it all begins to fit together. The testing of the kids, assigning them a toy, it's not for their own betterment, it's in order to provide larger subjects for Elliot's experiments. He isn't stuffing his employees into toys to bring them to life, he's using children. Oh, come on, just when I thought we would get through an episode without a FNAF reference. But that's not all, because Poppy Playtime saw FNAF's dead kids and said, hold my remnants, because if stuffing kids wasn't bad enough, these aren't just any children, they're orphans. At the start of Statues, before we even see any of these child testing papers, Mommy gives us a little monologue about why she's trying to kill us.
It was always so sad to see the kids grow. They called me Mommy because I was the closest thing they ever had to one. But they come for games and never come back.
They called me Mommy because I was the closest thing they ever had to one. All right, let me level with you. First off, I think they called you Mommy because, you know, that's literally the name of your toy. We see the commercial at the very beginning of the chapter. You've also spent the entire game talking about yourself in the third person, so none of this should be a shock to you. But you know what? She's also probably right. If this day-glow pink stretch spider is the closest thing the kids have to a mom, then yeah, chances are they're growing up parentless. This also directly aligns with the posters that we see throughout the factory. Posters that explicitly talk about Playtime Co.'s adoption program for orphans. In Chapter 2, it says, quote, Playtime Co. harbors a state-of-the-art education program for all orphan children. These children being tested are orphans. That's why, despite there being literally hundreds of experiments, notice that the experiment numbers go from the 800s all the way to the thousands, no missing children's reports are ever filed. I mean, heck, even Freddy's had to close after 5. This also applies to a select number of the game's death screens. Nobody is here by choice? Yeah, these kids didn't choose to be here, to be adopted by the company or turned into toys. And I'm sure at this point they're all well aware of the fates that are worse than death, like we see in another death screen. I still stand by our first theory on this one. I'm convinced that these death screens are Poppy talking to us. At the end of the chapter, she says that she has plans for us and prevents us from escaping on the train. This perfectly lines up with death screens like, you can die later. This isn't about you, and I still have plans for you. However, Chapter 2 introduces a new mechanic into the death screens. You see, while those that I've already mentioned all end with a flash of white, there are others that end with an ominous red screen. One of those red screens is even in a secret code like the one that we had in Chapter 1. I guess this is just a thing that they do now. Last time we deciphered the code to give us the phrase, stay, they need help. Fortunately, the new one in Chapter 2 uses a few of the same letters. In fact, the first word in this new code is exactly the same as one from the other code, they, followed by an apostrophe and 2 more letters, the second of which is also an E, so this is very clearly there. The next 2 words get a little trickier as they contain letters that we haven't seen before, but after a bit of analysis and trial and error, I managed to decipher the whole thing to read, they're just hungry. This, on its own, doesn't really tell us anything new, but when you start to combine it with the other red screen messages, it starts to paint a bigger picture. The prototype has saved us, isn't he wonderful? He is loose. This is an emergency lockdown. Innovation is key, may we forget death. This is no longer Poppy talking to us. She's horrified by the creation of these monsters using human test subjects. She doesn't like what's going on in the factory. No, these are the messages of someone else. Someone so obsessed with overcoming death that they can't see past the issue with their own experiments. They're just hungry? That feels like the excuse of one of those parents that believes that their child can't do any wrong. Except, you know, they're talking about a giant human-consuming erector set monster. These messages must be coming from either Elliot himself, the man who after the death of his daughter put his heart and soul into creating his toy empire, or one of the employees who believed in the cause so much that they were willing to sacrifice parentless children to find the solution. But why us? Why do we hear so many people talking in our ears when we die? In fact, why did we feel so compelled to return to the factory in the first place? I know we got ourselves a note saying that missing people were still here, but just not convinced that any minimum wage employee is gonna risk their lives in a factory where people mysteriously went missing 10 years ago. And when the giant Huggy suddenly went missing from the main atrium in the first chapter, yeah, most people are gonna nope straight out of there. Yet here we are facing monster after monster, fighting for our lives, determined to see this thing through. Why? I've actually been thinking about this since chapter 1, but at the time I just didn't have enough to give a definitive answer. Then here we are in chapter 2, and Mommy says this.
But you worked here. So if anyone deserves to die alone, it's you.
How does she know that we worked here unless she recognizes us? We know, thanks to tapes from people like Marcus Brickley, that most employees weren't aware that the factory was creating these giant living toys.
I took a peek beneath the gate, and some massive bloody thing was doddering about the bloody hallway.
Thing? You're sure it wasn't a person?
Ain't no person that's 50 feet long with 1,000 legs.
Marcus, you're losing me. Maybe you just saw a bunch of people walking by.
Look, it wasn't people, alright? I haven't a bloody notion what it was, but it wasn't human.
Plus, in front of the emergency exit that you find after falling through the vent, there's a note from Eddie M.N. Ritterman that also confirms this. Quote, "This project should only be known about by those with the authority at Warrenbach and those with authority at Playtime." So, for Mommy to recognize us as an employee, we need to be someone with the authority to be involved in the experimentation. She's shown to be aware of the scientists throughout the factory thanks to a note that we find in the water treatment area. This note discusses experiment 1222, aka Mommy Longlegs, and in this note we learn that she's being hostile to scientists working there. The note ends with, quote, "Have her transferred to high security maintenance immediately. Conditioning can begin." We also hear about suppression treatments from the VHS tape about 1006, but as we know in indie horror games, conditioning is never a painless process.
Let's encourage baby to cheer up with a controlled shock.
I promise, I'm really not trying to make this game sound more and more like FNAF. This stuff just kind of writes itself. If Mommy was being conditioned by these people, it would make sense that she feels like we deserve to die alone. I'm not sure I'd be too happy to see my torturer alive again either. So if we're not just some employee at the factory, are we a scientist then? One of the many people working on the experiments? No. And we know this based on this room. Just after you chase Mommy and Poppy down a giant hole, you wind up in a tube slide. If you turn around, you'll see that this room actually has a number of slides in it, each one with the name of a high-ranking member of Playtime Co. listed above. We just came out of the slide with the name Elliot Ludwig above it, who we already know is the creator, founder, and CEO. The other slides have the names Leith Pierre, Eddie MNR, and Stella Graber. We were first introduced to Leith Pierre right at the very beginning of Chapter 1.
Hi, my name is Leith Pierre, and I'm the head of innovation here at the Playtime Co. Toy Factory.
We also hear Leith's voice as the person interviewing Marcus.
So, Marcus, what happened?
You see, I was heading home for the day when my apars realised that I left me bloody wallet in the cafeteria. So I'm running through the lobby, and that's when I see it. A mop handle lodged under the innovation wing gate.
Now, what Marcus said there might seem insignificant, but it's not. It's Jacksepticeye. Of course, he's gonna be important for the lore. Before jumping into the hole after Mommy and Poppy, if you look around, you can actually see 5 corridors that lead to different wings of the factory, like the game station and innovation. 5 slides, 5 different wings to the factory. So if this is truly a center point leading to all the different wings, and all the slides lead from high-ranking members' offices, it would stand to reason that each name is associated with a different wing of the factory. For example, one of the wings is labeled Play Place, which sounds very similar to where Chapter 3 has taken place, Play Care. We know that Stella is someone with authority at Playtime, as she was in charge of sorting through all the orphan kids' test scores, and is therefore the one that would decide which kids move forward on the train headed to the next stop, Play Care, where she could then monitor and begin the experimentation process. And as Stella's voice is heard in the game station, it would lead me to suspect that Stella's in charge of all play elements of the facility, so the Play Place would likely come under her control. This leaves us with 2 wings left, research and production. Eddie MNR is a bit hard to pinpoint as we've only ever had 1 letter from him, but his note does refer to the creation of the lab that these experiments are taking place in. As such, it makes the most sense for him to be the head of research, or some similar sort of title, which leaves us then with the production wing. And you see, this is where we come in. You see, there are 4 slides with names that we've already mentioned, but there is one more in the right-hand corner hidden in shadow. I suspect that this one is our slide. Somewhere someone who is high enough at the company to be aware of the living toys, someone important enough for mommy to recognize, someone with an elite enough title that they got their own tube slide. We are the head of production. We're the ones putting these toys together, using the parts of the children from the game station. And when the toys malfunctioned and needed conditioning, they'd be sent right back to production for us to fix the faulty product. That is why we're here. It's the only wing of the factory that's left unaccounted for. It explains our role in the narrative. It explains why mommy recognizes us and why we're back. To either atone for our sins or to burn the entire place down so no one ever finds out what we did here. But that's not the end of it though. If I'm right, and this is meant to be our slide, we've actually been given a name. I mentioned that the 5th slide has no name above it, but the letters for the sign do seem to be present just on the floor. Jahyeonbaim. Now, names are hard. They're not normal words. Technically, anything can be a name, and you certainly can't just plug it into a word unscrambler to solve it for you. The team and I spent a few hours trying various combinations of letters, and I spent even longer going through both chapters of the game trying to find some kind of a clue to point me in the right direction. Some initials or a document with only a first or last name attached, but so far, nothing. I did come up with a couple of possibilities though. Things like Benjamin Yo, Benjamin Hoey, or J Bohemian. Can't say that they're anything definitive. However, there was one that stood out from the rest. One that seemed to fit with the world of this game and with the other names of characters. Ladies and gentlemen, I predict that our character's name is, drumroll please, Jamie B. Honey. Feels like it fits into a toy factory, doesn't it? We are Jamie B. Honey, the head of production, returning to the factory to try and undo all the wrongs that he and his co-workers committed all those years ago. Or, you know, we're trying to make sure that everything stays buried. We were vital to the production of these living toys, turning them from regular plastic and fur into the hellish nightmares that we see. And the future chapters are only going to reveal more monsters. And maybe it'll confirm the fact that in this story, the humans were the real monsters all along. But hey, that's just a theory. A game theory. Thanks for watching.